Hello and welcome. I'm David Gibson, Director of the Center on Religion and Culture at Fordham University, and your host for this presentation. Things Get Broken. A Jesuit reflects on Leonard Bernstein's Mass at 50. Our guest this evening is Father Stephen Schlesser of the Department of History at Loyola University, Chicago. But Steve Schlesser is much more than a historian, even though I hold historians in highest regard. He specializes in modern European intellectual and cultural life, yes, and he writes extensively as well on music, religion, mysticism, the Jesuits, of course, and Catholic thought and culture. Just about all those elements will come into play in this presentation, which inaugurates our observance of the Ignatian year here at Fordham University. It's a year that recalls the moment 500 years ago when a cannonball shattered the leg of a Spanish soldier, Ignatius of Loyola, on the parapets at Pamplona. The wound put an end to Ignatius's youthful dreams of personal glory, but it started him on a journey of conversion that has, by one path or another, led us all here tonight. When I asked Steve to deliver this opening lecture, he immediately accepted, and he lit upon the 50th anniversary of Leonard Bernstein's Mass as the topic and tied it in with so much else that was going on then in September 1971 and today in September 2021. Loss was not the last word for Loyola, as Father Schlesser says, as it was not for Bernstein, who provides music of both lament and hope after a broken year. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for supporting the CRC so that we can make these presentations possible. I look forward to chatting with Father Schlesser after his talk, so please remember to put your own questions in the chat box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and I'll be sure to gather them together and pose them to Steve as time allows. Now we'll share our screen and send it over to you, Father Schlesser.
I'm grateful for this invitation to offer the inaugural presentation in Fordham's Ignatian Year commemoration. The anniversary recalls the event 500 years ago, on May 20th, 1521, when St. Ignatius Loyola's leg was shattered by a cannonball during a military siege at Pamplona, Spain. Perhaps some of you in New York have seen the portrayal at St. Ignatius Loyola Church on Park Avenue. It's found in the large mural to the left of the high altar. But maybe it's better to say that we're not commemorating the cannonball breakage so much as its unexpected consequences. During his long recovery, Ignatius read some of the few precious books available in the Loyola family castle, and this reading catalyzed a conversion. So it's this conversion we're commemorating, the conversion of his vision. The vision as it evolved after the shattering of a leg, yes, but more importantly after the shattering of an old world and an old world view. The past was gone, pieces needed to be picked up and reimagined for a new future. This Ignatian milestone coincides with another, the 50th anniversary of the premiere of Leonard Bernstein's Mass, on September 8, 1971. The work had been commissioned by Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis for the opening of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C., named in honor of her late husband, assassinated 8 years earlier. Some of you will already be familiar with the climactic moment in Bernstein's Mass. The celebrant takes the monstrance and chalice and throws them to the ground. The action symbolizes the crisis of faith. Religious faith, yes, but many other crises in faith as well. The celebrant then sings an extended, complicated piece entitled, Things Get Broken. Bernstein evokes in heart-wrenching musical language what Milan Kundera would later call the unbearable lightness of being. The fragility of worlds and worldviews, the fragility of faiths of many kinds, the fragility of life itself. Back in 1971, The breakage in Bernstein's Mass was intimately connected to the Kennedy assassinations and the Vietnam War. 50 years later, we remember other more recent breakages. How easily things get broken. Bernstein's Lament transcends time. In the summer of 2018, celebrating the centenary of Bernstein's birth, Marin Alsop conducted Bernstein's Mass at Ravinia, summer home of the Chicago Symphony. The performance received rave reviews, and a year later it was repeated for recording by PBS's Great Performances series. It was then broadcast 1 year later in May 2020, in the very midst of the pandemic when everything, including Ravinia, was locked down. This production has been brought back online to the pbs.org Great Performances website for 1 month, I'm assuming for the anniversary, and you can watch it again, or for the first or third time, over the next 2 weeks. The other documentary resources on that page are also terrific. Clips in this presentation come from that production. Revisiting Mass via Ravinia, I noticed connections I hadn't previously seen, although the sprawling nature of the work resists any simple summaries. I want to single out 5 tropes, to use Bernstein's own word, that suggest overall coherence and structure. From the production's very beginning, thanks to its colorful staging of the children's chorus, the central theme of youth is clear. This can be easily overshadowed by the 2 opening blockbuster pieces, the celebrant's preceding simple song and the congregation's Almighty Father. However, sandwiched in between these 2 pieces, the children's chorus sings riffs on lines from Psalm 43 in the Hebrew Bible. In the Old Latin Mass, the priest and his usually youthful servers spoke these lines in low voices at the foot of the altar. I will go up to the altar of God, unto God who gives joy to my youth. In his 1971 review of the premiere for America magazine, the Jesuit musicologist C.J. McNaspy expressed some agitation at Bernstein's dramatic freedom. Using Latin texts interspersed throughout that suggested the Mass of some years ago, Bernstein included passages never sung before, as in the Introibo ad altare Dei, I will go up to the altar of God. But Father McNaspy did not ask why Bernstein not only retrieved this relic of the old Mass, but went out of his way to greatly amplify it. Watching this particular choreography sparked a memory. Just a little over a year after President Kennedy's death, Arthur Schlesinger published his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, 1,000 Days. In it, he recalled an exchange that has since been often quoted. On the evening following the assassination, Daniel Patrick Moynihan said to the Washington Post reporter Mary McGrory, quote, I don't think there's any point in being Irish if you don't know that the world is going to break your heart eventually. I guess that we thought we had a little more time. McGrory responded in grief, we'll never laugh again. Moynihan quickly replied, heavens, Mary, we'll laugh again. It's just that we'll never be young again. In Mass, the loss of youth initially arrives quietly in the lyrically poignant thank you. The singer recalls how, in years gone by, she could easily sing glory to God and thank you, but now things have changed. though she can't say quite when it happened. The thank you is gone. Youth's simple faith drifts away subtly and imperceptibly. In sharp contrast to this quiet lyricism, Bernstein's scrappy street chorus functions as a modern Greek chorus, articulating the inner thoughts and anxieties of both the players and the audience. Their rage and complaints explicitly refer to protests and riots in the Vietnam War era. Complaints reach fever pitch in the Dona Nobis Pacem, that is, the Grant Us Peace, which Bernstein composes as a plea for peace, paradoxically delivered with unbridled rage. It's easy to associate the street chorus numbers with 60s social unrest, but it also seems worth noticing, with 50 years' distance, that this kind of complaint, that is, this kind of lament, is a fundamental genre in the Hebrew Scriptures. In the book of Psalms, for example, the lament psalms are among the most powerful and poignant. And note also that Bernstein titled his first symphony, composed in 1942 when he was only 24 years old, the Jeremiah Symphony. The three movements are entitled Prophecy, Profanation, and Lamentation. Although the lament genre has variations in its applications to specific psalms, it typically includes an invocation, a lament, a confession of trust, and a petition. Seen through this lens, Bernstein's street choruses reflect both the 60s as well as his ancient religious heritage. They are prophetic lamentations. Also typical of the lament genre is a turning point. While scholars debate what actually happened at this moment, the change in mood is radical. Lament turns into praise. In broad outline, this is the form of Bernstein's third symphony, the Kaddish. The work was nearing completion in November 1963 when President Kennedy was assassinated. The title Kaddish, that is, sanctification, denotes the Jewish prayer sanctifying the Lord's name, but it is also frequently associated with death, as in the mourner's Kaddish. After an opening invocation, Bernstein lodges laments that culminate in a crisis of faith, the speaker's crisis of faith in the divinity, and perhaps the divinity's crisis of faith in humanity.
Your covenant, your bargain with man, tin God, your bargain is tin. It crumples in my hand, and where is faith now, yours or mine?
Bernstein's theme of a mutual crisis of faith between the divinity and humanity returns 8 years later in Mass. Here, Bernstein takes the Nicene Creed, normally recited or sung during the Sunday Mass, and transforms it instead into a painful crisis of faith. It carries Bernstein's earlier Kaddish symphony now into the late 60s and to the early 70s. I'm struck by the continuity in Bernstein's religious anxieties stretching from 1963 to 1971 and beyond, and in his composer's hand, ancient and contemporary fused together as one. However, the obvious, strong appeal, Broadway appeal, of the street chorus shouldn't let us lose sight of the centrality of praise in the Kaddish prayer and, more generally in the lament genre. Eight years later, Bernstein ingeniously weaves this central Jewish tradition into the midpoint of the Mass. Here the triple Sanctus hymn is normally sung to open the central thanksgiving, the Eucharistic prayer, Eucharist meaning thanks. The hymn comes from the prophet Isaiah's vision, where the fiery seraphs cry out, "Holy, holy, holy." In Mass, after an initial singing of the Sanctus, in Latin and English, Bernstein brings back the hymn for yet another round, this time in its original Hebrew.
Jesus' song is beginning to grow. Make wing and rise up singing from it and my soul.
From here on in Mass, angry lamentations will escalate as order increasingly turns into chaos, but it seems important to keep in mind this moment, the centrality of this moment of praise, magnification, sanctification, even in the midst of crisis. And also it foreshadows, points ahead toward the way that Bernstein will conclude his Mass. The climactic crisis in Mass, Things Get Broken, is about the gap between appearance and reality. As the veil is pulled away, trust in appearances collapses. This problem of outward appearances and inward reality is foreshadowed in an earlier movement, which some commentators have interpreted autobiographically. They read it as Bernstein's coded reflections on being unable to be public about his own same-sex attractions. This conflict leads to questioning what is real and what is show.
Lord, I could go confess, good and loud, nice and slow. Get this load off my chest. Yes, but why, Lord, I don't know.
And then, as if to highlight and underscore it, Bernstein offers this reprise.
What I say, I don't feel. What I feel, I don't show. What I show isn't real. What is real, Lord? I don't know.
Closely interwoven with this appearances-reality conflict is the word accident. And on one level, Bernstein's use of the word simply refers to life's fragility. Things get broken, often enough accidentally, unintentionally. But on another level, it seems that Bernstein is likely playing with the very technical meaning that the word accident has in Catholic theology. This tradition comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle through the medieval St. Thomas Aquinas. For them, the word substance, which means to stand under, substans, denotes that unseen carrier that underlies the accidental external qualities we perceive with our senses, sight, smell, taste, touch, and so on. Applying these distinctions to the Catholic doctrine known as transubstantiation at Mass, the outward appearances of bread and wine, for example, the accidents of taste, touch, smell, appearance, remain unchanged. However, the inward or underlying reality, the substance, is believed to be transformed into Christ's body and blood. These various elements come together in the climactic moment where the celebrant throws down the chalice and the monstrance. And commentators familiar with the Catholic Mass have asked, well, what is the Mass doing? What is the monstrance doing there at all? It's never used at Mass. A monstrance is a large ornamental vessel that holds the host in a glass encasement in order to show to a congregation at other ceremonies like benediction. Hence the name. Mostrare means to show, as in the word demonstrate. The practical answer is that Bernstein needed something to break or shatter, and the monstrance served this function, but a more complex symbolic answer is that the crisis of faith here is the collapse of faith in the doctrine about substance and accidents. And this crisis of faith points to a more general crisis about appearances and realities. What is show and what is real? So note that these descriptions of color and how the broken glass appears are about accidents.
Look, isn't that odd? Glass shines brighter when it's broken. I never noticed that.
Bernstein has ingeniously woven together multiple symbolic levels here. But of course, the crisis of faith that he's evoking extends far beyond religious faith of any kind. How easily things get broken. This is a cry of the heart about human existence in general, about the unbearable lightness of being in all of its historical manifestations, including for Bernstein the assassinations of President Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Bobby Kennedy, the 1970 Kent State shooting, which was just 1 year before the premiere of Mass, America's Cities Up in Flames, and beyond Bernstein into our own time. Bernstein here brings us full circle back to the beginning trope of youth, going up to the altar of God. But now the celebrant doubts whether he himself was ever really young.
Oh, I suddenly feel every step I've ever taken, and my legs are lame.
After the celebrant exits the stage, a haunting solo flute hovers over the congregations and the audience's long bereavement. How is Bernstein going to end this work? In a letter dated May 25th, 1971, a little over 3 months before the September premiere, Bernstein wrote poignantly about the problem of how to move from this screaming anger to the serenity of communion, namely, the end. He judged the quandary no easy job. He then referred to an exchange of some kind with Jesuit Father Dan Berrigan, who at that time was in prison for the 1968 Catonsville 9 action. Quote, Father Dan said today, leave them with the militant mood. Yell at them and turn out the lights. They don't deserve communion. Quote, when they stop the war, then we can have communion. How's that for a blazing finish? But Berrigan's suggestion didn't fit Bernstein's personal vision, which felt somewhat sicklied over. I know that a glorious solution exists, he concluded. I pray we find it. Bernstein's prayer was answered by returning to his religious roots, actually back to the Sanctus, to the Kadosh, just as praise has the final word in the language of Lament and the Kaddish, so too lost youth in Mass is gradually recovered as the child sopranos riff on the Latin word for praise.
Sing God a secret song, lauda laude.
The youth's repeated riffs on the word praise revive their elders one by one, They eventually joined together to produce a glorious chorus. Although these secret songs overtly recall the initial simple song with which the celebrant had begun Mass, it's now simplified even more, stripped down to only the barest speech sounds. Bernstein seems to say that anything beyond this, beyond praise, would be immodest, literally, just saying too much. This final modesty evokes continuities in Bernstein, for example, the exhilarating concluding chorus in his Candide. In response to Dr. Pangloss's overreaching claims that this is the best of all possible worlds, Bernstein follows Voltaire's injunction to make our garden grow, that is, replace presumptuous, immodest speculation with work close to the ground. A decade later, Bernstein concluded his Chichester Psalms with a similar declaration of epistemological modesty. The radical humility and dependence of a child described in Psalm 131, Lord, my heart is not haughty. Whereas Daniel Patrick Moynihan had lamented just 2 years earlier that we'll never be young again, Bernstein celebrates youth regained. However, it's youth with a difference, a youth tempered by the experience of doubt, disillusionment, rage, death. Youth that has been shattered and broken by a cannonball or an assassination. It may be naivete refound, but it is nevertheless a distinctly second naivete, tempered and transformed by critical distance. Youth that has experienced a conversion of worldview. Although the world returns, it is not the same world. It is a renewed world. It seems to me that the concluding chorale in Mass is itself something of a return to Bernstein's own youth. In 1945, at age 27, he had composed music for Hashki Venu. The liturgical text said or sung in Hebrew at evening services. Cause us, O Lord our God, to retire for the evening in peace, and then again to arise unto life, O our King, and spread your canopy of peace over us. Be a shield around us. Remove from our midst all enemies, plague, sword, violence, famine, hunger, and sorrow. Spread over us the sheltering canopy of your peace. Nearly 30 years later, Bernstein echoes this youthful composition to conclude his Mass.
The Mass is ended. Go in peace.
The youthful Hashki Venu, and nearly 30 years later, Almighty Father, prayers for safe refuge in an accidental existence of things much too easily broken.
That was a superb presentation. I cannot thank you enough, in my case, for introducing me to this piece. I was one of my first, I'll date myself, one of my first memories was of the assassination and funeral of John F. Kennedy, followed quickly by the shocks of Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, the Vietnam War, Kent State, all of those things that you mentioned. But Bernstein's Mass in 1971, I hadn't known of and wouldn't have appreciated certainly then. Quick question to start off our discussion. How was it received? I mean, I'm so stunned by it now, and obviously, which I want to talk about the relevance to today, but how was it received in 1971? I guess both critically first, and if I can say Catholically, you know, by the Catholic Church.
Well, critically, it was mixed. Just this past year, let me just say that I'm hoping that this essay that I've written on this will appear in Commonweal in the near, like, next few days. And it has a number of these historical references. And one reference that I have there is how in the New York Times, it said this was one of the greatest works ever and so on. And in the Washington Post, this was Bernstein at his very worst. And what I liked about that, this was discussed in the New York Times the last year or so, is that kind of continues to this day. And so if you look at the New York Times, I think it was last year, and one writer was, you know, this is the summit of Bernstein's life, and the other one was, this is him at his very worst. It's too much, it goes on too long, it's overly sentimental, and so on. So, you know, it's had a critical reaction on both sides from the very beginning. You know, among the Catholics, so some extreme ones, performances were canceled and like this. But if you look at the reviews in both Commonweal and America, I mentioned the one America, C.J. McNasby, and in the Commonweal article forthcoming, I mention the response in Commonweal. Quite positive, to be honest, both. Also, John Gallen, who was a Jesuit liturgist, wrote another one in America saying that this was fine liturgy. So yeah, it's been mixed all along. But it's more positive, I think, than you might think. You know, rewatching this and replaying it over the last year or so, I mean, we had to imagine what it was like. I have the advantage of tons of articles written on this, all kinds of analysis. Imagine what it must have been like to be sitting there in 1971. You had no idea what was coming. And this thing, and how much of it could you honestly have understood? It just comes at you so fast. It's like a water hydrant.
I'm also stunned, you know, the theological complexity. I mean, thank you for your explanation of transubstantiation, which was best. I'm gonna use that again. And this whole, you know, to talk about intramural debates these days about the meaning of the real presence and the Eucharist. These were things he was engaging very, as you said, very directly, if maybe obliquely for those who weren't so up on it. But it's a very sophisticated piece.
I think it is, and again, I'm not sure how much of that you could have gotten if you were sitting there in the audience and this was coming at you. But a couple things that I do note in a Commonweal article. One, in 1965, Paul VI had issued an encyclical on this. So this crisis of faith in transubstantiation was a very big deal in 1965. It's September. Secondly, you know, for those who have read a lot of Daniel Berrigan's works, he's just so devoted to the Eucharist. It's kind of amazing, really, how often it comes back. And this is where I'm assuming that some of that must have come from.
A couple of questions I want to get to. I also have just one quick moderator privilege. How much was also, I'm realizing as this was going on, there was a kind of Jesus moment. You had Godspell right around the same time. You had Jesus Christ Superstar coming out. In a sense, this was the most traditional.
Yes.
But there was a real Jesus moment, it seems, or fascination in popular culture.
Very much so, yeah.
Quick question, how close is the staging that we just saw to Bernstein's original conception or direction?
Pretty close. So if you go onto YouTube, you can get the 1981 staging at the Kennedy Center, which reproduced the 1971. So the 1981 is the one that we have the video of. And yes, what Bernstein does in the score is he basically, here's the altar, and here are the players, and here's the orchestra. It's very minimal what he lists there. So the Ravinia staging, which has so much interaction, and of course just spectacular choreography and cinematography, you're getting all those close-ups. This is something that Ravinia really adds, but yeah, pretty close.
Quick question, was there any public reaction from Jackie Kennedy, Jackie Onassis at that time?
I'm not aware of it, except that she was very happy with it. We don't have her reaction to it in the same way that we have a thank you note that she wrote to Bernstein after he conducted the Adagietto from Mahler's Fifth Symphony at Bobby Kennedy's funeral. And that's a remarkable piece of evidence where she just talks really in very expressive terms about how moved she was by it.
Question in here, could you say something about the tensions for Bernstein, Leonard Bernstein, in keeping the Catholic Mass, using the Catholic Mass as a framing principle for what is really such a highly ecumenical message? And of course, the questioner also says, given the problem of Catholic anti-Semitism, the history of that going on, here you have a Jewish composer using the Catholic Mass as this frame.
Yeah, I mean, what a great question. And it so locates us in the 60s. So, the Vatican Council had ended 6 years earlier, and it had the statement Nostra Aetate. So there was a great deal of Jewish Christian dialogue that comes after the council. So I'd say that, that's one thing. I think another is that the personal relationship. Bernstein was a close friend of the Kennedys back to the presidency, and then again brought back for Bobby Kennedy's funeral and with Jackie. So whatever religious differences there might be, that bond was very strong. So his choice to use a mass as, I like the word, framing device, I don't think it was fraught with, even 10 years earlier, say 1961, before the Vatican Council opened, I don't think it was as fraught with tension as it would have been 10 years earlier. What I really noticed going through this was his, it is a sense of humor, it's a sense of irony. So to take the Creed, for example, I believe, and turn it into a statement of really not believing, to take the Gloria, singing Gloria, and to turn it into an occasion for having lost the ability to do, to sing Gloria, to sing praises and thanks, to take the Agnus Dei, which I do think is the most ironic piece in the entire thing, to give us peace, but it's just sung with such rage.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one that really hit me. Going in over, touch him, and then everything's smashing.
Yeah, his capacity to take it as a frame again, and to use the elements, but to turn them around. Watching this again recently, I don't know if you've ever seen Kieslowski's Decalogue, but I've taught it a number of times. I thoroughly enjoy it. Krzysztof Kieslowski takes each one of the 10 commandments, and then he kind of, what would you say, twists, contorts way out of recognition. But it's brilliant in that it uses the base of the commandment to make some point about life that we would not really ever normally come up with. To me, that's what Bernstein does in the Gloria and the Creed, the Sanctus. Just he takes the elements, but then he uses them for his own interests.
Let's talk about, some of the parallels really from that day. Some people are talking about the things we're going through today, some of which you mentioned, and this time 50 years ago. Is it fair to make those kinds of parallels? Do you feel that this is something we can learn from, or was that all that was going on? I mean, the assassination of a president and these major leaders and the street unrest. Is it of another order than we are experiencing today?
Well, I'm not sure I'd want to indulge in comparisons. I think historians always get into hot water using the past too easily. But what I'd say is this. What really struck me about this, viewing it now in the midst of everything we've been in, is we've taken a very pragmatic approach to the pandemic, to the politics of the day, to the recent evacuation of Afghanistan and so on. But the kind of metaphysical claim that Bernstein is making here about existence in general, I'm not sure we've really had that. And I think we could really use a discourse on a higher level. There is a presumption, I think, in what we're going through now, that if just something here or there had been done differently, we wouldn't be in tragedy. We would not be in what seems to be irredeemable loss. And I just think that's misguided. I just think we are human beings and we are thrown into the world and we try to make our way. And I think what Bernstein really allows us to do is acknowledge that, live through it experientially through the piece. And his resolution is also metaphysical. I've long taught Candide to the kids, so I really enjoy it. But that coming to the very end, when you think about it, immediate reaction to the McCarthy era, Lillian Hellman is writing it and so on, to become modest about what we think about the world, to stop the kind of imperatives that you saw in the McCarthy era and you see today. And this stepping back for him, which is very biblical. It is both Catholic and Jewish, and acknowledging that there is something larger than us.
And finding that space. I think you and I had spoken at one point about one thing I think that is analogous, and maybe it even started in the 60s, is the speed.
Yes.
The speeding up of everything. I mean, we lament today, and I lament Twitter and our smartphones, and then the fire hose of information that comes at us all the time. And yet, back then as well, we had the Kennedy assassination on TV, essentially. We had Walter Cronkite crying. We had, all these other things happening on TV in real time, almost before we could process them. Is that part of this?
Yes, and I also think it's just part of the beauty of music and art. So I think we're just overwhelmed by the immediacy of the screens of every type. TikTok, Facebook, just go on and on and on. And everything is coming at us. We have very little time to process anything. What I love about one of the things I love about Bernstein's Mass is it does for us what music and art can do. And it puts us in a frame for a while, and you can call it an aesthetic experience, a musical experience, artistic, religious, but it really does allow us to step back from the intense pressure that we feel in our heavily screened world, and respond a little differently to loss. I was saying to the students, I teach a historiography course that's required for the history majors, and we were talking last week, and I said, what does the image of the helicopter leaving Kabul get you? Nothing. It gets you feelings, but you don't get the kind of 20 years of history that we hopefully are studying in that course that would explain it to us. And that, to me, is what Mass gives us. We have the pressure, we see the losses. The images especially are so overwhelming. And this experience allows us to, in some way, contemplate it and come up with some really different reaction response to it at the end.
And that's what you've allowed us to do here with this presentation and with this conversation, Steve. I appreciate it so much. This has been wonderful. I was thinking of was it Bernstein's letter to Berrigan? I mean, just the fact that they're these are people writing to each other. Yes, and the ending, that moves. He wants to move from screaming anger to serenity at the end, and
yeah,
and he manages to do it.
What I think is very touching about that is clearly he had a great deal of affection for Berrigan. He and his wife had a fundraiser for both Philip and Daniel around that time. I think it was May. But that doesn't allow him to sort of turn his back on his own tradition. And his own tradition is, yes, you can complain and you can acknowledge, say, Job, for example. But when you get to the end of it, the answer in every one of those books is, I've kind of forgotten where I am in the universe, which is kind of a small place. And it's really big, and I have to have an attitude of wonder and awe in the face of it. Doesn't solve any problems, but it does reposition us.
That's exactly right. He finishes that letter. I know that a glorious solution exists. I guess he's talking about Mass, but and I pray that we find it. It's a great prayer, but it's can seem unfulfilled. So, Father Steve Schlosser, thank you very much for joining us and this special presentation. Thank you all for joining us as well and for supporting the Center on Religion and Culture here at Fordham. Check out our website and follow us on social media for information on upcoming events, but also including more presentations to mark this Ignatian year. This was a terrific start to our commemoration. Thank you again, Steve Schlosser. For now, I'm David Gibson, Director of the Center on Religion and Culture at Fordham University. Thank you.
Thank you.